Welcome to Echo, the podcast where we share our personal perspectives on questions about God, spirituality, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm Ryan Becker, your host. No matter who you are, we hope that you find value and encouragement through real discussions about real things. Let's jump in. Echo.
This episode of the Echo Podcast is sponsored by Southern Adventist University.
Welcome back to Echo. My name is Ryan Becker. I'm your host for this show, and today I am cautiously optimistic about this conversation. This is a big topic for a lot of people. This is actually, I think, not just a national narrative, but a kind of global narrative right now. And it's this idea of association with the institution of the church, with the denomination, whether it's Adventism, evangelicalism, whether it's a completely different religion entirely or faith tradition, this idea of what do I do when I'm fundamentally against or I strongly disagree with things that my denomination that I claim is doing. And so to have this conversation, I've brought on two wonderful human beings, Paola Alvarez and Rachel Beaver, to come on. So why don't you tell us just a bit about yourselves? Rachel, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Rachel Beaver. I am a communications intern at the Carolina Conference.
And I'm Paola Alvarez. I'm the Secretary for Treasury for Carolina Conference.
Awesome. So this is going to be fun because we're three people that all have employment ties to
Yes.
the church. So we'll just address that elephant in the room because we are going to be as honest as possible about this, I think.
Yes.
But we don't want to make anyone think that we're trying to be deceptive. We're trying to hide anything. It's very clear where a bias lies, considering we do work for the institution in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
And myself working for an Adventist university. So it is important that we just address that. So the other side of this too, the disclaimer I want to make here is we're going to talk about our personal opinions. So, and wherever we land on that. And so it doesn't necessarily mean it's reflective of the institution.
Right.
It's literally, we're going to talk from our own perspectives as individuals. Mm-hmm. And we hope that you can be understanding with that, whatever we say. I don't know where this is going, obviously, because we're about to launch into the conversation that hasn't happened yet. So let's go. Let's just start. What do I do if I disagree with things that the greater faith communities, right? So this isn't just the local church. This isn't just I disagree with a decision or someone they nominated into a leadership position. This is like my church is doing things or has a belief that I just don't agree with or I don't like. What do I do? How do I navigate that?
That's a tough one. I mean, how do you... Oh, goodness. I think that people are concerned with what your denomination is doing wrong, or you disagree with what they're doing as a whole. And, we can bring up subjects, women's ordination and abortion and heavy topics that is very easy to get on a side.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. You have an opinion and most people take sides. But I have come to realize that when people get involved in this type of subjects, I think people lose track of what's really important. What makes that denomination who they are? Mm-hmm. And it's my understanding that the ultimate answer to that is God.
Yeah.
So if we can agree on that, at least we're good.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm the one who thinks, and like you said, this is our personal opinion about what's happening in our denomination or our listeners' denominations, and I'm the one who thinks that I need to worry, and I am worried about my salvation, and of course, my kids and my family. But at the end of the day, is your salvation. And I think people take too much time fighting, if that's the word, or arguing about, should we or should we not do this? Or is this biblical? Is this not biblical? Although that's very important, there are things that we do need to,
And they affect lives. They impact lives. And
They do.
Yeah.
They do. But I think that at the end of the day is like, are you worried about this particular subject more than your own salvation? It's like, that's an entire, that's heavy enough,
Yeah.
It's like, how do you maintain your personal relationship with God, not bringing all these things into the table, which consume time and efforts and brain.
No, it's true. I think there's a lot of Christians that don't have a relationship with Jesus, that don't actually have that, and they're so focused on these things they've let their own life kind of it's been self-destructive to that point. And I do think it's not that those conversations aren't important, but it is this balance of like, you do need to really work out your own salvation too, and serve your family, serve your friends and those around you. And if you're so focused on this larger narrative conversation that you miss out on the local impact of your church community and of your life, then there is a problem. And I think there's overlap too. I think that participation in that conversation can be encouraging to those in your community that do value that or care about that, right? And I think the other side of this is we I struggle with this personally, because there is the idea that if you belong to the organization, then you automatically support everything it does. And we see this in it's not even just organizations. If you literally belong to any group, and I see this specifically in the last several years, I've seen this in two very, very specific things. The first one is the way that because of terrorism, Islamic terrorism, we've seen how people are reacting to Muslims who I have seen this several times, even to friends in my own life. They've been told, like, how can you still be a Muslim when your belief system is all about this and hurting people that don't believe the same way you do? And they're like, well, not all of us are like that, right? That's the first thing you want to say. And aren't all Adventists vegetarian? Well, not all of us.
Nope.
Right? That's what you want to say. But people think that you can't belong. Like, we've lost the nuance.
Right.
We've lost this idea that you can still belong to an organization and disagree with some of the things that happen in it, and understand that many of the things that happen in it aren't officially sanctioned by the denomination as a whole either. Right? Not every sermon preached by an Adventist pastor is a proper sermon that belongs in Adventism.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's this hard thing of, I think we also need to start moving away from this idea that just because you belong to a group doesn't mean that you endorse everything in it. Same with the other one was immigration, and people just now see someone who isn't white and they go, get back to your country. And it's the same, like, oh no, you must be an illegal. Like, nah, I've been here my entire life. Like, I was born here. In fact, English was my first language. Like, that's happened with a lot of people, but it doesn't matter. They see an identifier and they go, no,
we're all
that
guilty by association.
Yes. And so I think we do need to move in a nuanced way of, I think it starts in my own heart, not lumping people together as I interact with them. So I think it does start on the individual level there.
And on that individual level of just making sure that you are comfortable with yourself and with what you believe, and kind of not letting what other people say impact that. Like, if the church, takes a stand on one particular issue that you disagree with, don't let that affect your relationship with God, because there's still, that's like step one. That's the most important thing. Don't let what other people say or something, that we can't necessarily prove is right or wrong, because sometimes we just don't have the answers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I've come to even the conclusion too, like, let's say I disagreed with the church in the area of, like, the Sabbath, right? So I wanted to go to church on Sunday. Well, the problem with that is Sunday churches aren't also preaching the other things that I agree with within Adventism, such as, like, state of the dead or things like that. And I certainly don't, like, for me personally, my dad passed away when I was 17. I don't really love people telling me he's in heaven watching over me. That's not, like, a thing for me. That doesn't help at all. Right. So it's like, I don't want to be in an environment that has beliefs that I am not, the majority of my beliefs don't line up. So if I disagree with Adventism, maybe on one thing, which, by the way, I agree with the Sabbath, just so we're all clear on this.
Good.
I agree with it. But if, let's say, I disagreed with one thing, but the majority of everything else I'm good with, well, then I'm still going to, like, this is home. You don't just leave home because your fridge broke.
Right. Exactly.
Burn the whole thing over, burn it to the ground, rebuild it.
And you know what? It has to do how you approach that disagreement. You know, if you're going to start hammering people with disrespectfulness and if you're going to start, you know, coming across as just someone who doesn't want to be, you know, people, you know, like if they say, oh, there's, you know, Paula's going to talk, so we know what she's going to say, how she's going to say it. And I think that has a lot to do with it. You know, we can be in disagreement, but the problem comes when we start losing our respect for the other person and start hammering down on things that, you know, has nothing to do with the subject anymore.
Yep. Yeah, no, and I think the other thing too is we do this with politicians a lot, which I understand why we do it, but then we start doing it to each other, which is like, just because you believed one way at one time doesn't mean that you can't change your mind ever. And the church as a whole changes its mind as well. Yeah. And especially within Adventism, where we're set up as a system that can change its mind on its beliefs, right? We don't have a creed that is eternal and binding. We have amendments to the fundamental beliefs. We've added to them. This has been, you know, it's been a growing process.
Right.
And understanding that, yeah, we can change our minds. Oh, weren't you against this, 5-10 years ago? Yeah, we were. And then now we're not. And we understand that wasn't where we should have been. You can move away from that the same way personally you move away from old beliefs or old behaviors. Like you can adjust and live a different life. So I think you know, not holding the past against someone too is a big deal. Yeah. The other one too for me is, given within Adventism's history, right? We have some shaky racial stuff. We do have some issues with women as well, as far as like the topic of women's ordination has been a major controversy in our church, and you know, opportunities for women both in leadership and in service. That's been a huge thing. So we have issues there. We have some you know, we have issues across the board here, and I think I'm trying to figure out how exactly I want to say this, right?
I think either way you say it, it's going to come out the way it is.
I know. For me, I think the other important thing to understand is that this is 100% a process, and we do have to work it out. And when you're talking about a global community, you're not talking about, it's hard enough to get 10 people to agree.
Right.
Getting 20 million people to agree is an entirely different thing, right? So you have to celebrate the little victories wherever they occur, and look for and look for ways to keep that progress moving forward. So the question there is like, how do I, if the denomination as a whole, how do I go about making some positive change? How do I go about doing something to be a solution to the problems and be the change I want to see?
Well, you know, I think that when you say, you know, seeing the change that I want to see, sometimes how we wanted things to come out doesn't work that way. And, you know, I don't have to work towards a change hoping that it will happen, you know, because if it doesn't, what do you do?
Yeah.
You know, you just let it, forget it. Let me just leave. I don't think we should work towards something that has to happen, you know, like, because then disappointment will get there. I think that as an individual, you know, what can I do to bring us together instead of this separation thing? It starts with yourself. I mean, you know, it's how you treat people. And basically it comes down to, you know, how can you reflect Jesus to others, you know? That's why salvation is personal. It's not collective, you know. If it was, you know, I hope that you're saint enough that we all can get, you know, saved. But I think that it's just using the method of Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being, living the life that you are in agreement with, right? Like living and being the kind of church member and church person that you feel you're called to be, and treating those people treating people differently in your context is important, right? So if the denomination as a whole isn't doing something, but you can, then you do something. If your church has decided they don't want to build a handicap ramp for someone, then you go build it. If you've got the time and the tools and the expertise, right? You can learn it on YouTube. It's a simple example, but I think the other thing too, I think we bind ourselves to is, and I was thinking about this with all the issues I mentioned earlier too, right? If you leave at this point, right? If there's some straw that broke the camel's back, then you also need to be able to justify why all the other stuff wasn't enough for you to leave, right? So if a history of racial issues is a problem, or a history of women's equality is a problem, or of the way that abortion is a problem, right? If any of those stances are a problem, and then something else happens later that has to do with, like, the latest one is questions on authority and a power struggle. So if you're going to leave over the power struggle, why weren't the other things the line? Do you see what I mean? So you can back yourself into a corner, because then you're saying, okay, this other thing is more important than these other things, but one of these is more nebulous than the other, or whatever. Like, you have to really kind of figure out why I'm leaving at this point and why I didn't leave before.
Right. And I do struggle what you just said about, if the church decides not to build that ramp for that handicap, and you go and do it yourself. I do have an issue with that, because then you're just saying, well, I can do whatever I want. I mean, we are a structure denomination, and I don't think that, I mean, we have levels, and that's just the way we think. I'm not sure if I'm getting to the right point here, but I don't want people to think that, okay, if the church says, we're not doing that, well, I just can go do it myself, because then what's the point of having a church or a
belonging to a greater community and accountability?
Yeah, correct. So if I think that if I don't agree with what we're going to have for lunch today, then I have the right to say, well, I don't want that, and I'm just going a different route. Or I can be supportive and be like, I don't want to eat that, but I'll go with you guys anyways.
Well, and so can I add some nuance to that example that may be something that kind of bridges the gap here too? Because I agree with you 100%, right? There is accountability. I think what I mean is, like, in your interpersonal relationships, you can, if you see that the church isn't properly valuing a group of people, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to break policy to treat that person or people with respect. That's what I'm saying. Like, you can influence and be a decent human being, regardless of what a group around you might be doing.
Right.
I think maybe that adds a little bit more nuance to that, and while still trying to honor and respect the process and being a part of the church community that you're in, not just flippantly going, well, forget you, I'm going to go do my own thing. No, not at all.
Right.
You are a part of a body.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So huge. Thank you for that, though.
No,
Thank
no
you.
problem.
It was I realize now, like, I made a very strong statement and did not realize how
I'm like,
strong
wait a
it
minute,
was.
how'd that came across?
Thank you. I appreciate that. So is there a line, do you think, where the church does something so egregious or, something so bad that you just can't, that you would actually be unfaithful to stay? Do you think that there's a line there?
I think so, because I think we've kind of danced around the topic of, people have different convictions about things. Like you said, why were other things not egregious enough for you to leave before? And that's just the thing about people. Some things are touchier topics, but if you see your church just going a drastically awful direction, if there's a horrible power struggle, or they're like, we're gonna go out and we're gonna go and murder 10,000 people, I don't know, and they're like, okay, I'm not behind that, I'm gonna go.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think, if the church becomes something fundamentally opposed to what it was before.
Yeah.
Like if its entire purpose becomes opposite of what it was. if it loses the thing that made it who it is or what it is, or it votes to get rid of it entirely.
Right.
I think there's like, then at what point when you know, if I have a car that's breaking down and I replace it part after part, at what point do I stop saying this isn't the original car anymore? This is a different car. And it's the same thing is if a church keeps making decisions that are fundamentally opposed to who it is and what its stated purpose is, then yeah, well, you joined the church because it lined up with this purpose that you've aligned yourself with. And I can understand if someone individually decides like, yeah, this clearly is not the place for me anymore. But I think that's not a decision. That's not something I say lightly either. You see what I'm like?
Right.
It's such a struggle.
Very difficult. Yeah, it is, because see, the thing is that you can't decide to leave the church based on your opinion or your, this is how I see it. You know, like you said, it has to be fundamental, it has to be biblical.
Yes.
That way, it's not your opinion. It's the Bible's opinion. It's the Bible's word. You know, it's because that's the thing, though. I mean, why do people leave the church? It's because of what their own, how they come out with this idea of, you know, something is. Oh, I left because, you know, I don't know. I don't like the way they do music. I mean, that's your personal opinion. But the only way that I, Paola Alvarez, will leave the church is that you're telling me that, you know, the Sabbath is not the Sabbath anymore. That it's a different day. It's a Wednesday or it's a Thursday.
Yeah.
Well, that's just not a personal opinion. You're telling me that the Bible says something else that it doesn't. So how did you leave your denomination? When did you decide to leave your denomination because it's saying something that is not biblical? You have to be very careful, though, because you have to make sure that it's not your opinion or somebody in that higher position's opinion.
Yeah.
You know, it's because they have turned away from the Bible.
Yeah.
I think intention is a pretty big thing, too. Like, if people are making certain decisions, you know, why are we doing this? Is it because we are in agreement that this is what, like you said, the Bible says? Or are we just not want a women pastor? Or we don't want abortion?
And to be clear, all of those things are examples of, like, they're the hot button issues.
Yeah.
We're not,
Yeah.
like, those aren't the focal, they're just the ones that come to your mind.
Right.
And for anyone who's curious about the abortion thing, the conversation is really just around Adventist hospitals and offering that as a service.
Yeah.
That's where that controversy is, just so we're all clear on where that is. And we're referencing these as examples because these are things that people struggle with. And I think the thing that I want to end here on is it's okay to struggle and disagree and stay. It's a process for sure. And we don't say leave. It's easier to just say it, but we're not saying it. I'm not telling anyone to leave.
No.
And I don't think any of us are advocating for that at all. And I think it is important that this is a process. It's not just, I don't like that, so I'm out.
Right.
And this is something that can take place over the course of several years. This is something that can take place over the course of, weeks or months, whatever, depending on what level of denomination you're dealing with or your faith tradition you're dealing with. But it is something that, you continue to work out and wrestle with. You've made a commitment. See that commitment through to the best of your ability.
Exactly.
And it is okay to wrestle with it and disagree and fight through it. That's community.
Right.
Community isn't always just great things. It's humanity, and it's messy, and sometimes we got to get a little messy to work through some issues.
Quite honestly, it helps you with your character.
Yep.
And because the more encounters you have with people like that, the more you get to practice your patience, and the more you get to practice your, what would Jesus do?
Your love.
Your love, your patience, your
Unconditional.
tenacity, all of it. Yeah. It is a part of growing your character in Christ, for sure. That's why being a part of a community is so important.
Yeah.
And I do have to say, do not abandon the ship.
No.
We don't abandon the ship.
If you abandon the ship, you leave it, like, they win.
Yeah.
The people that you didn't want to win if you leave.
Yeah.
And it becomes a lot harder to make changes from outside than inside.
Exactly.
I will say, though, to balance that as well, for those that have had the courage to leave because they have felt unsafe, like literally unsafe, I do acknowledge and respect the courage that it took to do that, because in many cases it did take people leaving for the church to see that there was a crisis.
Right.
And I'm not saying that to say that it's okay to leave, but I do understand the situations where that was the only option for people.
Yeah.
And I don't want to shame anyone for doing that, especially if they still have a vibrant relationship with Jesus Christ.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So I'm trying to be as balanced here as we
Right.
possibly
Yeah.
can, but it's a
I get
fine
it.
line.
Of course.
Get it.
So, thank you guys for your thoughts here. This has been super helpful. Anything you want to leave people with, words of encouragement here? Do not abandon the ship is a great one, by the way. So yeah, absolutely, and I agree. That is a call to action for sure. Any other final thoughts? Anything you want to leave with?
I just like to say, don't abandon. When I say don't abandon the ship, I mean, don't leave the message. If you want to leave the church, that's one thing, but don't leave the message.
Don't leave God.
Yeah, your faith can,
Yeah.
the remnant isn't a denomination. The
Right,
remnant is the
right.
people who follow Jesus. And so, yes, I 100% agree with that. Thank you guys for sharing your perspectives and opinions here. And thank you for listening to mine. And to our listeners, if you're in a position where you're wrestling with your faith, your membership, any of that, know that we're praying for you, and know that it is okay to be where you are. It's okay to struggle and to wrestle with this. And I don't just say that to say it's okay to wrestle with it as long as you end up where we expect you to. No, wrestle with this. Pray. Talk it out with
Yeah.
people. Work this out. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, as Paul says, and have the journey you need to have. And know that we are praying for you, and just thank you for being here and for being a part of this journey with us. If you want more content around Echo or anything else that Project Refresh is doing, then head on over to theprojectrefresh.org, and you can check some links to social media and stuff in the show notes as well. So thank you for being a part of this journey with us. I appreciate you so much, and as does everyone here on the team. So thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening to this episode of Echo. We hope you enjoyed it. To stay up to date with new episodes as we release them, and for more awesome content from Project Refresh, a ministry of the Carolina Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button below. And don't forget to like and leave a comment.
This episode of the Echo Podcast is sponsored by Southern Adventist University.